Have you ever looked at an old photograph and noticed something that just didn't belong? Today, we're diving into one of the most unsettling Christmas mysteries from 1910, where a seemingly perfect family portrait hid something truly disturbing in its reflection. If you enjoy mysteries that blur the line between reality and the unexplainable, you're in the right place. Before we begin, if you already enjoy this type of content, leave your like to support me. Now let's uncover what was hiding in that mirror. The winter of 1910 arrived in Providence, Rhode Island, with a heavy blanket of snow that transformed the industrial city into something resembling a postcard. The Whitmore family had been preparing for weeks for their annual Christmas celebration, and this year would be special. Margaret Whitmore, the matriarch of the family, had insisted on hiring a professional photographer to capture the moment. It was an extravagance, certainly, but with her 3 children growing so quickly and her husband Thomas finally finding stable work at the textile mill, she felt they deserved to preserve this season of prosperity. The photographer, Mr. Edmund Hartley, arrived at the Whitmore residence on December 23rd, carrying his heavy equipment through the snow-covered streets. He was a serious man in his 50s, known throughout Providence for his meticulous attention to detail and his ability to capture not just images, but the very essence of his subjects. Margaret had heard about him through her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who swore that Hartley's portraits were so lifelike they seemed ready to step out of the frame. The Whitmore home, a modest 2-story structure on Benefit Street, had been decorated with care. A freshly cut pine tree stood in the corner of the parlor, its branches adorned with handmade ornaments, strings of popcorn, and small candles that would be lit only for the photograph. The wallpaper, though slightly faded, still retained its Victorian elegance, with patterns of burgundy and gold. Behind the tree, positioned against the wall, hung a large oval mirror with an ornate brass frame, a wedding gift from Margaret's mother that she treasured deeply. Thomas Whitmore, a tall man with a thick moustache and tired eyes that spoke of long hours at the mill, stood stiffly in his Sunday suit. He wasn't comfortable being photographed, believing it to be somewhat frivolous, but he couldn't deny his wife this happiness. Beside him stood Margaret, wearing her finest dress, a dark green velvet gown with lace collar that she had sewn herself. Her hair was pulled back in the fashion of the time, and despite the hardships of their working-class life, she maintained an air of dignity and grace. The children completed the scene. 11-year-old Sarah stood between her parents, her blonde hair tied with a red ribbon, wearing a white dress that Margaret had stayed up late finishing. 8-year-old William, already showing signs of his father's height, wore knickerbockers and a crisp white shirt, though he kept fidgeting with his collar. The youngest, 5-year-old Charlotte, clutched a porcelain doll and struggled to maintain the serious expression her mother had requested. Mr. Hartley took his time arranging the family, adjusting their positions slightly, tilting heads, and ensuring the lighting from the parlor's gas lamps created the perfect ambiance. He placed his camera on its tripod, disappearing beneath the black cloth to examine the composition through the lens. The exposure would require everyone to remain perfectly still for several seconds. Any movement would blur the image and ruin the photograph. "Remember, absolute stillness," Hartley instructed, his voice muffled beneath the cloth. "Think of something pleasant, something that makes you happy. It will show in your eyes." The family held their poses as Hartley removed the lens cap. The seconds stretched on, feeling like an eternity to young William, whose nose began to itch terribly. Charlotte's doll slipped slightly, but she caught it without moving her body. Thomas thought about the raise his foreman had promised him. Margaret thought about her children's futures, hoping they might have opportunities she never had. Sarah thought about the book she was reading, an adventure story about explorers in distant lands. Finally, Hartley replaced the lens cap and emerged from beneath the cloth. "Excellent. That should do nicely. I'll develop the plate and have the portrait ready by the first week of January." The family relaxed, the children immediately breaking into chatter about Christmas morning. Margaret offered Hartley tea, which he declined politely, explaining he had 2 more appointments that evening. He packed his equipment carefully, accepted his payment, and disappeared into the snowy December night. Christmas came and went with all its joy and modest celebrations. The Whitmores exchanged simple gifts, attended church services, and shared a meal with neighbors. The days between Christmas and New Year passed in the peaceful rhythm of winter, with Thomas working reduced hours at the mill and the children playing in the snow that seemed never-ending that year. True to his word, Mr. Hartley delivered the finished portrait in early January. It arrived in a simple frame, wrapped carefully in brown paper. Margaret unwrapped it with trembling hands, eager to see how her family appeared frozen in that Christmas moment. When she finally revealed the image, tears filled her eyes. It was perfect. Every detail was crisp and clear. The tree's decorations, the children's expressions, even the subtle smile on Thomas's usually stern face. She hung it immediately in the parlor, right beside the mirror where they had posed. If you're enjoying the video so far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot. For years, the portrait remained exactly where Margaret had placed it, becoming just another piece of the Whitmore family's history. The children grew, eventually left home, and started families of their own. Thomas passed away in 1928, followed by Margaret in 1934. The house on Benefit Street changed hands several times, and eventually the portrait ended up in an estate sale, purchased by a collector of Victorian photography for a modest sum. Dr. James Richardson had always been fascinated by early photography. As a professor of American Studies at Brown University in Providence, he had spent decades collecting and studying photographs from the turn of the 20th century, believing that these frozen moments offered invaluable insights into the daily lives, customs, and social structures of the era. His office was cluttered with boxes of old photographs, daguerreotypes, tintypes, and glass plate negatives, each one a window into a lost world. It was a rainy afternoon in October 1973 when Richardson acquired the Whitmore family portrait at an estate sale on the East Side. He hadn't been looking for anything in particular, just browsing through boxes of old photographs and documents when he spotted it. The frame was damaged, the glass cracked in one corner, but the image itself remained remarkably well preserved. Something about the composition caught his eye, the way Hartley had arranged the family, the lighting, the careful attention to detail that marked the work of a true craftsman. Richardson paid $3 for the portrait and brought it back to his office. He carefully removed it from its damaged frame, intending to have it restored and possibly use it in one of his lectures about early 20th century American family life. The photograph would make an excellent example of middle-class aspirations during the Progressive era. He placed the photograph on his desk and began examining it more closely with a magnifying glass, noting the quality of the print, the clothing styles, the decorations on the Christmas tree. It was during this examination that he noticed something odd in the background, barely visible in the oval mirror behind the family. At first, he thought it might be a defect in the glass or a shadow cast by the photographer's equipment, but the more he looked, the more distinct it became. There, reflected in the mirror's surface, was what appeared to be a face. Not the face of anyone in the photograph, not the photographer himself, but someone or something else entirely. Richardson felt a chill run down his spine. He adjusted his desk lamp, bringing it closer to the photograph, and looked again through the magnifying glass. The face was pale, almost luminous against the darker background of the mirror. The features were difficult to make out precisely, but Richardson could discern what appeared to be hollow eyes, sunken cheeks, and an expression that seemed to convey either profound sadness or something more sinister. The angle of the reflection suggested that whoever or whatever had been captured in the mirror had been standing to the left of the photographer, in a position where they should have been clearly visible to everyone in the room. Richardson's academic mind immediately began searching for rational explanations. Perhaps it was a double exposure, though Hartley's reputation suggested he was too careful for such an error. Maybe someone had been standing in that spot and simply wasn't visible from the camera's direct angle. Or perhaps it was a trick of light and shadow, the human brain's tendency to see faces in random patterns, a phenomenon known as pareidolia. But the more he examined the image, the more convinced he became that this was something else entirely. The face had too much detail, too much definition to be merely coincidental. And there was something about the expression, the way the hollow eyes seemed to stare directly at the camera, that Richardson found deeply unsettling. He decided to have the photograph professionally analyzed. He took it to a colleague in the art department, Professor Linda Chen, who specialized in photographic restoration and authentication. Chen had access to sophisticated equipment that could examine photographs at a molecular level, detecting any signs of manipulation or double exposure. Chen's initial reaction mirrored Richardson's own discomfort. "That's disturbing," she said simply, staring at the face in the mirror. She spent the next several days examining the photograph using various techniques: ultraviolet light, infrared photography, microscopic analysis of the paper and emulsion. Her conclusion was both fascinating and troubling. "As far as I can determine, this photograph hasn't been manipulated," Chen reported. "There's no evidence of double exposure, no signs that the image has been doctored or altered in any way. Whatever was captured in that mirror was there when Hartley took the photograph in 1910. Richardson felt both vindicated and disturbed by this confirmation. He began researching the Whitmore family, hoping to find some explanation for the mysterious face. He spent weeks at the Providence Public Library, poring through city directories, census records, death certificates, and old newspapers. He managed to piece together the basic facts of the Whitmore family's life, but nothing that explained the presence in the mirror. Leave a comment below about what you think of this story so far. Thomas Whitmore had been a mill worker, Margaret a homemaker. Sarah had married and moved to Boston in 1920. William had died in France during World War I. Charlotte had lived in Providence her entire life, working as a school teacher until her retirement. None of them, in any interview or document Richardson could find, had ever mentioned anything unusual about the Christmas portrait. Richardson contacted Charlotte's daughter, Ellen Morse, who was living in a nursing home in Cranston. She was 82 years old, but still sharp-minded. When Richardson showed her the photograph and pointed out the face in the mirror, Ellen stared at it for a long time before speaking. "My mother never talked about that Christmas," Ellen said finally. "I asked her about it once, when I was a teenager and found the photograph in a box. She just said it was best forgotten and wouldn't say anything more. I always thought that was strange because she loved talking about her childhood. But that photograph, she wouldn't even look at it." Richardson's discovery of the mysterious face in the Whitmore Christmas portrait soon became a topic of fascination among his colleagues at Brown University. What had started as a simple archival find had transformed into something much more intriguing, a genuine mystery that seemed to resist conventional explanation. Richardson found himself becoming increasingly obsessed with uncovering the truth behind the image. He reached out to other historians and photography experts across the country, sending copies of the photograph and asking for their professional opinions. The responses were mixed. Some dismissed it as a simple trick of light or insisted that Richardson was seeing patterns where none existed. Others, however, were equally troubled by the image and agreed that something genuinely anomalous appeared to have been captured in that mirror. Dr. Robert Kenshaw, a photography historian from the Smithsonian, was particularly intrigued. He had spent years studying the work of early 20th century photographers and was familiar with Edmund Hartley's portfolio. "Hartley was a perfectionist," Kenshaw wrote in his response. "He would have noticed anything unusual in his composition." The fact that this image was developed and delivered to the family suggests that either he didn't see the face in the mirror, or he saw it and chose to say nothing. This observation troubled Richardson deeply. If Hartley had seen the face while developing the plate, why would he remain silent? And if he hadn't seen it, what did that say about the nature of the image itself? Richardson decided to investigate Hartley's life and career. He discovered that the photographer had maintained a studio on Westminster Street in downtown Providence from 1905 until his death in 1923. Hartley had been respected in his field, known for his technical skill and his ability to capture the character of his subjects. He had photographed many prominent Rhode Island families and had even done some work for the state government, documenting public buildings and official events. But Richardson also discovered something darker in Hartley's history. In December 1910, just days after photographing the Whitmore family, Hartley had experienced what was described in newspaper accounts as a nervous breakdown. He had closed his studio for nearly 3 months and, according to one article, had been treated by a physician for acute melancholia and disturbing visions. When he finally reopened his studio in March 1911, neighbors reported that he seemed changed, quieter, more withdrawn, and prone to sudden bouts of anxiety. Richardson found one particularly revealing account in the Providence Journal from February 1911. A reporter had interviewed Hartley's assistant, a young man named Peter Calloway, who spoke about his employer's condition. "Mr. Hartley has been greatly troubled by something he will not discuss," Calloway was quoted as saying. "He speaks of faces in mirrors and shadows that follow him. The doctors say it is merely exhaustion, but I have worked with Mr. Hartley for 5 years, and I have never seen him like this." The connection seemed too significant to ignore. Had the Whitmore photograph triggered Hartley's breakdown? Had he seen the face in the mirror, either while taking the photograph or while developing it, and been so disturbed by it that it affected his mental health? Richardson attempted to locate any descendants of Edmund Hartley, but discovered that the photographer had never married and had no living relatives. His studio records had been lost or destroyed decades ago. The trail seemed to have gone cold. Frustrated but not defeated, Richardson shifted his focus back to the Whitmore house itself. The building on Benefit Street still stood, though it had been converted into apartments in the 1950s. He contacted the current owner, explained his research, and asked permission to visit the property. The owner, a man named Donald Foster, was intrigued by the story and agreed to let Richardson tour the building. On a cold November morning, Richardson stood in what had once been the Whitmore parlor. The room had been subdivided, the original features mostly removed or covered over, but he could still identify where the Christmas tree would have stood, where the family had posed. The mirror, of course, was long gone, but Foster mentioned that when he had purchased the building, the previous owner had told him stories about that particular room. "She said people who lived here reported strange things," Foster explained. "Cold spots, unexplained noises, the feeling of being watched. One tenant in the 1960s insisted she saw a face in her bedroom mirror that wasn't her own. She moved out after 3 weeks. I always figured it was just old building sounds and overactive imaginations, but now, hearing your story about that photograph, I'm not so sure." Richardson documented everything Foster told him, adding it to his growing file on the Whitmore portrait. He was now convinced that something genuinely unusual had occurred in that house in December 1910, something that had been accidentally captured on film and had left lasting effects on everyone connected to it. His investigation led him next to the Providence Historical Society, where he hoped to find more information about the house's history before the Whitmores had lived there. What he discovered added another disturbing layer to the mystery. The house on Benefit Street had been built in 1847 by a shipping merchant named Cornelius Blackwood. Blackwood had lived there with his wife and 4 children until 1868, when tragedy struck. According to newspaper accounts from that time, Blackwood's eldest daughter, 19-year-old Elizabeth, had died suddenly in the house under circumstances that were described as mysterious and distressing. The exact cause of death was never publicly disclosed, though one article made a veiled reference to self-inflicted harm resulting from profound melancholia. Elizabeth had been found in the parlour, the same room where the Whitmore photograph would be taken 42 years later. Richardson found one photograph of Elizabeth Blackwood in the Historical Society's archives. It was a formal portrait taken around 1865, showing a young woman with pale features, dark eyes, and an expression that seemed both sad and distant. When Richardson compared this photograph to the face in the Whitmore mirror, he felt his blood run cold. While the quality of the mirror reflection made precise comparison difficult, there were similarities: the shape of the face, the spacing of the features, the haunting quality of the eyes. As winter settled over Providence in 1973, James Richardson found himself at an impasse. He had assembled an impressive collection of evidence: historical documents, photographic analysis, testimony from descendants, and records of strange occurrences. Yet he was no closer to explaining the face in the Whitmore Christmas portrait than when he had first discovered it. The more he investigated, the more questions emerged, each answer leading only to deeper mysteries. Richardson decided to present his findings at a conference on American photography history in Boston. His presentation, titled "Anomalous Images in Early 20th Century Photography, a Case Study," attracted significant attention. The audience was split between skeptics who insisted on rational explanations and others who admitted that the evidence Richardson had gathered defied easy categorization. Dr. Margaret Holloway, a psychologist from Harvard who specialized in perception and cognition, offered an intriguing perspective during the question and answer session. "What we're dealing with here might be something beyond traditional photography," she suggested. "There are documented cases throughout history of cameras and mirrors capturing images that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of optics and light. Whether these represent genuine anomalies or simply limitations in our comprehension of how these technologies interact with human perception remains an open question." Her comment resonated with Richardson because it acknowledged both the mystery and the possibility that some questions might not have definitive answers. Perhaps, he thought, the point wasn't to solve the mystery, but to recognize that reality sometimes presents us with phenomena that resist explanation. In the months following the conference, Richardson received letters from people across the country who had their own stories of anomalous photographs. Images that showed figures who weren't present when the picture was taken, faces in windows of empty houses, shadows that didn't correspond to any visible object. Some of these accounts could be dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications, but others seemed genuinely puzzling. One letter particularly caught Richardson's attention. It came from a woman named Dorothy Hartwell in Portland, Maine, who claimed to be the great-niece of Edmund Hartley. She had heard about Richardson's presentation through a friend and wanted to share information that had been passed down through her family. "My great-uncle Edmund never fully recovered from whatever happened to him in the winter of 1910, Dorothy wrote. "My grandmother, Edmund's sister, told me that he became obsessed with the idea that his camera could see things that human eyes couldn't. He believed that the photographic process, particularly the long exposure times required in that era, allowed the camera to capture layers of reality that normally remained hidden. He spoke of temporal echoes and residual images, things that had happened in a place leaving behind impressions that could be recorded on sensitive film." She went on to explain that Hartley had destroyed many of his photographs from that period, apparently disturbed by what he had captured. He had considered giving up photography entirely, but ultimately decided to continue, though he became much more selective about what he photographed and where. "He told my grandmother about a Christmas portrait he had taken for a family in Providence," Dorothy's letter continued. He said that when he developed the plate, he saw something in the background that terrified him. He delivered the photograph to the family because he had been paid and felt obligated, but he said he should have destroyed it. He believed that some places hold on to their past, and that his camera had accidentally documented something that was meant to remain unseen. Richardson was struck by how Hartley's supposed explanation aligned with the history of the house. Elizabeth Blackwood's death in 1868, the reports of strange occurrences over the years, and the face that appeared in the mirror during the Whitmore family's Christmas portrait in 1910. If Hartley's theory about temporal echoes had any validity, then perhaps what his camera had captured was not a ghost in any traditional sense, but rather some kind of residual impression left behind by a tragic event. But Richardson's scientific training made him hesitant to fully embrace such an explanation. He consulted with physicists and experts in optics, asking whether there was any conceivable mechanism by which a camera could capture light from a different time period or record events that had occurred in the past. The responses were universally skeptical, though one physicist admitted that quantum mechanics had revealed stranger phenomena than that. As 1974 began, Richardson made a decision. He would publish his research in an academic journal, presenting all the evidence he had gathered without attempting to provide a definitive explanation. His article, The Whitmore Portrait, a case study in photographic anomalies, appeared in the Journal of American Photography History that spring. It created considerable controversy, with some scholars praising his thorough documentation, while others criticized him for giving credence to what they saw as superstitious nonsense. The photograph itself remained locked in a climate-controlled archive at Brown University, available for study, but treated with a certain reverence, or perhaps wariness, by those who knew its history. Students and researchers occasionally requested to see it, and Richardson always obliged, curious to see their reactions. Some saw only what he told them to look for, convinced by suggestion. Others claimed they couldn't see a face at all, just shadows and light. But a few, always a few, would stare at the mirror in the background and grow visibly uncomfortable, sometimes refusing to look at the photograph for more than a few seconds. If you enjoyed this video, leave a comment down below. I love hearing your thoughts and answering questions. Richardson himself continued to study the photograph periodically, never quite able to let the mystery go. He would sometimes take it out late at night when his office was empty, examining it under different lighting conditions, always hoping to see something new that might provide clarity. But the face in the mirror remained exactly as it had always been, pale, hollow-eyed, and utterly inexplicable. In 1982, Richardson received one final piece of information that added yet another layer to the mystery. A demolition crew working on an old building in downtown Providence had discovered a cache of glass plate negatives in a sealed basement room. Among them were several dozen plates from Edmund Hartley's studio, apparently stored away and forgotten decades ago. Richardson was given access to the plates and discovered that several of them showed similar anomalies, faces or figures appearing in mirrors or windows, shadows that shouldn't exist given the lighting conditions. Hartley, it seemed, had captured numerous such images, but had chosen not to print or distribute most of them. The Whitmore Christmas portrait had been an exception, perhaps because Hartley had convinced himself it was nothing more than a trick of light, or perhaps because he felt he couldn't refuse to deliver what he had been commissioned to create. One plate in particular caught Richardson's attention. It showed a portrait of a family taken in 1909, 1 year before the Whitmore photograph. The setting was different, the subjects were different, but there in the background, barely visible in the corner of a mirror, was a face that bore an unsettling resemblance to the one in the Whitmore photograph. Richardson realized that whatever Hartley had captured might not have been specific to one location or one family, but rather something more widespread, a phenomenon that occurred under certain conditions that he couldn't identify. This discovery shifted Richardson's understanding of the mystery. Perhaps the question wasn't what had appeared in the Whitmore parlor that Christmas Day in 1910, but rather what Edmund Hartley's camera had the unique ability to record. Had there been something in his technique, his equipment, or his process that made his photographs more susceptible to capturing these anomalous images? Richardson spent his remaining years, he passed away in 1997, pursuing this question, but he never found a satisfactory answer. The Whitmore Christmas portrait remained his most famous case study, the image that had started him on a journey into the strange borderlands between the documented and the inexplicable. He came to believe that some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved, not because the truth was unknowable, but because the very existence of such mysteries served a purpose, reminding us that despite all our scientific knowledge and technological advancement, reality still contained spaces where certainty gave way to wonder and disquiet. The photograph hangs today in the American Photography Collection at Brown University, accompanied by a placard that tells its basic story. Thousands of people have viewed it over the decades, each bringing their own interpretation to what they see in that mirror. Some see nothing unusual, others see exactly what Richardson saw, a face that shouldn't be there, staring out from the past, with hollow eyes that seem to hold secrets that were never meant to be captured on film. And perhaps that's the truest answer to the mystery. Not that something supernatural occurred in that Providence parlor in December 1910, and not that there's a purely rational explanation that we simply haven't discovered yet, but rather that the boundary between those two possibilities is far less clear than we like to believe. The Whitmore family gathered that day to capture a moment of Christmas joy, to freeze time and preserve memory. What they captured instead was something else entirely, a reminder that when we try to stop time, we sometimes catch glimpses of things that exist outside of time altogether. The face in the mirror remains exactly as it appeared more than a century ago, still watching, still waiting, still refusing to offer any explanation for its presence. And maybe that's exactly as it should be. If you're not subscribed yet, take the opportunity to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. Você está absolutamente certo. Peço desculpas pela falta. Aqui está o capítulo 5. The decades following James Richardson's death in 1997 did little to diminish the fascination surrounding the Whitmore Christmas portrait. If anything, the advent of digital technology and the internet transformed the photograph from an academic curiosity into something approaching a modern legend. In 2003, a graduate student at Brown University scanned the image and posted it to an early paranormal research website, where it quickly gained attention among enthusiasts of unexplained phenomena. Dr. Sarah Chen, who had taken over Richardson's position in the American Studies Department, found herself fielding dozens of inquiries each year about the photograph. Amateur investigators, professional skeptics, television producers, and genuine researchers all wanted access to the original image. Chen maintained Richardson's policy of allowing scholarly examination while protecting the photograph from exploitation or damage. In 2008, Chen authorized a comprehensive analysis using the latest digital imaging technology. A team from MIT's Media Lab spent 3 weeks examining high-resolution scans of the photograph, applying sophisticated algorithms designed to detect manipulation, aging artifacts, and optical anomalies. Their 200-page report concluded what Linda Chen had determined 35 years earlier. The photograph showed no evidence of tampering, double exposure, or technical error. Whatever appeared in that mirror had been present when Edmund Hartley's camera shutter opened in December 1910. But the MIT team added something new to the conversation. Using digital enhancement techniques, they were able to extract far more detail from the mirror's reflection than had been visible to Richardson or earlier researchers. The enhanced image revealed not just a face, but what appeared to be a full figure standing in the doorway of the parlor. A young woman in what looked like mid-19th century clothing. The level of detail was extraordinary. The texture of fabric, the style of hair, even what might have been the glint of something metallic at the figure's throat. When Chen compared this enhanced image to the portrait of Elizabeth Blackwood from the Providence Historical Society, the resemblance became impossible to dismiss. The clothing matched the style Elizabeth would have worn. The positioning of the figure suggested someone standing in the exact spot where, according to the original floor plans of the house, the parlor entrance had been located in the 1860s, before renovations in the 1880s had moved the doorway to its 1910 position. This discovery reignited Richardson's investigation, but it also deepened the mystery. If the camera had somehow captured an image of Elizabeth Blackwood, how had it done so? And why had this particular moment, this particular Christmas portrait, been the trigger? Chen discovered something Richardson had missed in his research. In the Providence Journal archives, she found a small article from December 1867, exactly 1 year before Elizabeth Blackwood's death. The article described a Christmas celebration at the Blackwood residence, noting that the family had decorated their parlor with uncommon festivity and had commissioned a portrait to commemorate the occasion. The article mentioned specifically that the family had posed before their magnificent oval mirror, a treasured heirloom. The implication was staggering. The same mirror that hung in the Whitmore parlor in 1910 had been in that exact location 43 years earlier when Elizabeth Blackwood was still alive. Could the mirror itself be the key to understanding the phenomenon? Chen traced the mirror's history as thoroughly as possible. After Margaret Whitmore's death in 1934, the mirror had been sold along with other household items. It had passed through several owners before being purchased in 1952 by an antiques dealer named Harold Voss. Voss's records, still maintained by his grandson, indicated that he had sold the mirror in 1954 to a collector in Newport, but the trail went cold after that. Despite extensive searching, Chen could not locate the mirror or determine its current whereabouts. However, she did find something intriguing in Voss's personal notes. He had written that the mirror made him profoundly uncomfortable and that he had kept it in his shop's back room rather than displaying it prominently. He noted that customers who saw it often remarked on feeling watched or experiencing sudden chills. One entry from November 1953 was particularly disturbing. Third person this month has asked if there's someone standing behind them when looking in the mirror. There isn't. I'm getting rid of this thing as soon as I can find a buyer fool enough to take it. In 2015, a documentary crew from a streaming service approached Chen about featuring the Whitmore portrait in a series about unexplained historical mysteries. Chen agreed, hoping that broader exposure might lead to new information. The documentary aired in October 2016 and reached millions of viewers worldwide. The response was overwhelming. Chen's office was flooded with emails and letters. Most were from people simply sharing their reactions to the story, but several contained potentially significant information. A woman in Vermont claimed her grandmother had worked as a maid in the Blackwood house in the 1890s and had spoken of Elizabeth's spirit remaining in the parlor. A man in California sent photographs of his own family portraits from the early 1900s, claiming they showed similar anomalies, though none as clear as the Whitmore image. Most intriguingly, a 78-year-old woman named Patricia Whitmore Chen, no relation to Sarah Chen, contacted the university claiming to be the great-granddaughter of William Whitmore, the boy in the photograph who had died in World War I. She had been searching for information about her great-grandfather for years and had never known the Christmas portrait existed. When Sarah Chen met with Patricia, the elderly woman brought a small leather journal that had belonged to William. He had kept it during his service in France and had written in it regularly until his death at the Battle of Belleau Wood in June 1918. Most entries described the mundane realities of military life, but one passage stood out. Written in March 1918, William had reflected on his childhood and family. "I have been thinking much about home lately," he wrote, "and about that Christmas when the photographer came. I was only 8, but I remember feeling cold despite the fire in the hearth. I remember looking at that mirror while we posed and seeing someone standing behind Mr. Hartley, a woman in old-fashioned clothing. I thought perhaps she was his assistant, though she never spoke or moved. Mother must have seen her too, because after Mr. Hartley left, she took down the mirror and stored it in the attic. It hung there for months before Father convinced her to put it back. She never explained why she had removed it, and I knew better than to ask." This first-hand account from someone who had been present during the photograph was extraordinary. It suggested that at least 2 members of the Whitmore family, William and his mother Margaret, had seen something unusual that day, though they had apparently never discussed it openly. William's description of the woman in old-fashioned clothing matched the enhanced digital analysis of the figure in the mirror. Sarah Chen incorporated this new evidence into her research, publishing an updated paper in 2017 that included William's journal entry and the results of the MIT analysis. Her conclusion was carefully worded. "While we cannot definitively explain the presence of the figure in the Whitmore Christmas portrait, the accumulated evidence suggests that something genuinely anomalous was captured on film in December 1910. Whether this represents a failure of our understanding of photographic technology, a psychological phenomenon shared by multiple observers, or something that falls outside current scientific paradigms, remains an open question. The photograph continues to generate interest and debate. In 2023, a team of quantum physicists from Stanford proposed a theoretical framework suggesting that under certain conditions, light could carry information from different temporal states, creating the possibility, however remote, that cameras might occasionally capture images from the past or future. Their paper was highly speculative and received skeptical responses from the broader scientific community, but it represented the first serious attempt to provide a quantum mechanical explanation for phenomena like the Whitmore portrait. Today, the photograph remains in Brown University's collection, one of the most studied and debated images in the history of American photography. Researchers continue to examine it, each generation bringing new technologies and new perspectives to bear on the old mystery. Some claim to have solved it, offering explanations ranging from the mundane to the fantastic, but none has achieved consensus. The house on Benefit Street still stands, now a private residence once again. The current owners are aware of its history and occasionally allow researchers to visit, though they report no unusual experiences themselves. The parlor where the Whitmore family posed has been restored to approximate its early 20th century appearance. Though the mirror, that enigmatic oval mirror that may hold the key to everything, has never been recovered. Perhaps Richardson was right in his final assessment. Perhaps some mysteries serve a greater purpose by remaining unsolved. The Whitmore Christmas portrait stands as a reminder that for all our technological advancement and scientific understanding, reality still holds spaces of genuine uncertainty. It challenges our assumptions about time, memory, and the nature of what can and cannot be captured on film. The family gathered that December day in 1910 simply wanted to preserve a happy moment. What they preserved instead was a question that has echoed across more than a century, touching everyone who encounters it. The face in the mirror continues to stare out from the past, offering no answers, no explanations, no comfort, only the undeniable fact of its presence. And in that presence, in that refusal to be explained away or rationalized into non-existence, lies perhaps the photograph's greatest power. It forces us to confront the possibility that our understanding of the world, however sophisticated, however scientifically rigorous, may still be incomplete. That there may be phenomena we observe but cannot explain, experiences we share but cannot categorize, and images we see but cannot comprehend. The Whitmore Christmas portrait will continue to haunt researchers, fascinate viewers, and resist explanation. It will remain what it has always been, a window into a moment when the ordinary and the inexplicable intersected, when a family's simple desire to commemorate a holiday captured something far stranger and more profound than they could have imagined. And somewhere, perhaps in a private collection or a forgotten attic, the oval mirror with its brass frame sits waiting, holding whatever secrets it witnessed across the decades, silent and inscrutable as the face it once reflected on that cold December day in Providence, Rhode Island.